This is Matthew Perry. I am the Vice President of Editorial at ISMG, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session, in which we will discuss proactive cyber defense, identifying risk before it becomes an incident. And joining me with this conversation is going to be Bruce Johnson, who is the Vice President of Solutions at TekStream, and also Dr. Tina Karhoff, who is the Industry Advisor at Splunk. Before we begin, I just want to tell you a little bit about ISMG. ISMG, we currently publish 38 international media sites. That includes Bank Info Security, GovInfo Security, Info Risk Today, Data Breach Today, and AI Today among them. In all, we provide an audience of over 2 million global security and technology leaders with a daily diet of news, interviews, analysis, research, events, and educational programs, just like the one that you're going to see today. A little bit of housekeeping. If anybody should experience technical issues while you're viewing today's webinar, you can write to the email you see on screen, webinars@ismg.io, as we do have technical support standing by. In addition, I just want to emphasize that today's content is copyrighted material, and it is meant for today's session and individual study purposes only. So if you or your organization would like to use the information presented in today's session, or you're looking for a customized training education, please contact us at ISMG. A little bit about our sponsor. Let's start with TekStream. TekStream powers digital resilience. The company helps organizations modernize, secure, and optimize their technology environments so that they can adapt, recover, and thrive in an increasingly AI-driven world. Through deep Splunk expertise across cybersecurity, observability, and managed services, TekStream combines expert-led opinions with AI-augmented intelligence to help organizations reduce operational risk, improve their resilience, and strengthen existing technology investments across complex multi-vendor environments. And to learn more, visit www.tekstream.com. And as well about Splunk, Splunk is helping to build a safer and more resilient digital world by equipping customers with unified security and observability platforms that they need to keep their organization secure and up and running, no matter what digital disruptions come their way. And you can always learn more about them from www.splunk.com. And then I just want to do a couple of just quick introductions of our panelists today, starting with Bruce Johnson. Bruce has over 38 years of experience in information technology industry. That includes security, infrastructure architecture, software development, and management of multiple portfolios. So his experience with Splunk is deep. It goes into security solutions, cloud migration, portal, content workflow, integration, and project management. So at TekStream, he works to implement security and compliance solutions and leveraging Splunk for their customers in a variety of environments and industries, as well as a variety of cloud migration and broader Splunk consulting solutions. And then Dr. Tina Karhoff is an industry advisor at Splunk, which is a Cisco company, where she helps state and local governments use data and analytics to detect fraud, strengthen cybersecurity, and improve operational resilience across critical programs like unemployment and other public benefits. As a former public sector CIO and vice president over executive programs at Gartner, she's got a very unique focus to her work with agencies, helping them navigate complex program integrity, compliance, and modernization challenges. Okay, well, let's just jump right into it. Bruce, my first question is for you. Looking back on a decade now of SLED Splunk deployments, and I know that that's, I mean, we're throwing a lot of organizations under that one little acronym or anything like that. So feel free to parse it out a little bit. But what I'm most curious about is what are the biggest shifts in the threat environment, and are these organizations actually keeping pace?
Two different questions. The Gartner conference opened up with is Mythos real or is it marketing? And their response was, it doesn't matter. which I thought was really provocative. I think the underlying message was it's the fact that all of the trends are pointing toward it being a real threat. And I think that has been, it goes without saying, that's been the most massive shift in the threat environment. And the interesting thing for us is that we, as Gartner has said, everyone needs to shift left. And this doesn't mean shift left in the MITRE framework. It means shift left to be more proactive. And that includes focusing on exploitable risk. That includes taking a different approach to risk assessment to look at where are you really vulnerable and rank risk accordingly. It also means that for us, a lot more emphasis on deception engineering, using AI to deceive AI, providing a false front and a carrot in order to get AI to attack an environment that emulates production, that twins production, et cetera. There are brand new characteristics there. The only reason that I bring that up is that everywhere we have implemented, we see AI activity. So the definitely from that perspective, we all know that that is going to be the biggest shift. What we have found is that it is not going to be, it is now. So it's accurate to say every environment, 100% of the environments that we have started to do early detection, we've seen AI-driven activity. It may be human plus AI, but yeah. So that's what I would point to as the biggest shift. And of course, in SLED, that has implications everywhere. Every company is facing more friction because they are having to move faster because they're developing more in-house with using AI techniques. They're doing a lot of build versus buy. But that leads to friction with every organization that they interact with. It's even greater in the context of SLED because we have to train students to be ready for this new environment. So, Tina.
Yeah. So, and again, so they're starting to use the AI, they're
Yeah.
starting to build the tools, everything like that. But overall, I mean, again, historically, the SLED, because they have always had to do, more with less generally. Do you feel like, given where they are and, the resources that are available to them, that they are keeping pace?
I think that they do keep pace as well as they can, right? There are so many different state agencies, local governments. It's much worse at the local level. There's just not enough resources to keep up, and a lot of our customers are struggling to understand what is the impact of AI. How do I use it? What are the safeguards that I want to put around how my employees are using AI? Because sometimes it's our employees that do something without necessarily intending to. Putting state information or citizen or resident information into a chat bot, into an AI agent, where they don't realize the damage that they're doing by releasing that information in the wild. I think that in partnership with TekStream, we've had such a wonderful response from our customers because we've been able to bring, Bruce had mentioned students, students into their first jobs when they come out of college through partnership with LSU. But these kids are coming out not only with a college degree, they're coming out with experience and they're getting their first jobs where they can really have an impact for our customers at a lower price point because they are early career.
That's really, really interesting. And, and it also, I mean, one thing I wanted to ask you specifically, Tina, is, given your background with law enforcement, military, been a public sector CIO, you've had time at Gartner. How does that very diverse background help shape your counsel to government agencies on their cyber risk?
So I used to wonder the same question. How does all of this disparate experience, kind of all fit together? I think it gives me a really good holistic 360-degree view. I certainly understand mission impact from my law enforcement and military background. I served during Desert Storm, and so understanding what's critical to the mission is absolutely important in state government. I understand the pressure on the ground from being a public sector CIO. It's a very hard job. Part of that is resource constraints from a human perspective, and part of it is resource constraints from a dollar perspective. So when I look when I worked at Gartner, Gartner really helped to take out the vendor noise, right? And I love Bruce's answer that it doesn't matter if Mythos is real or marketing. We still have to be prepared to respond to it. And so when I counsel customers, particularly in the government space, I focus on what moves the needle. It's protecting identity. It's improving visibility across all of your disparate systems. And then it's building cyber resilience that allows you to keep going regardless of the challenges that you're going to confront. And I think that that's what supports public service trust and delivery of the things that our residents are looking for every day.
That really, really helps. I appreciate the context. And it sets up, getting into the meat of our conversation very well, because I want to talk a little bit about exploitable risk versus alert volume. I mean, again, I think the point about Mythos is really, really well taken. And, between Mythos and many other things, the vulnerabilities, the alert volume and the vulnerabilities are just skyrocketing. We're looking at tens of thousands of vulnerabilities being, revealed annually, but yet there seems to be indications that like maybe only 500 or so that are going to be truly exploitable within certain ecosystems. Bruce, I maybe want to start with you. How should that gap change SLED priorities, or should it?
I mean, it changes everything, doesn't it? So, right now, Patch Tuesday runs into Patch Saturday. You know what I mean? So, if you're looking at vulnerability response as a compliance problem, still you're missing the boat. It's a risk problem now. And arriving at exploitable risk is tricky, right? It is a combination of a variety of different orthogonal views, to use a $10 word. It's having the perspective of, what do I value as a company, married with what is exploitable without having necessarily to turn Mythos loose within my environment, which we all know from a pen test perspective is evolving, but certainly challenging right now to turn an AI loose to find those vulnerabilities. So our approach, needs to be tempered with all of those kinds of phases of risk, if you will. That is projected risk when you're looking at doing a risk operation center, observable risk with being able to put together deception engineering and attack path mapping and all the rest of that to really look at your environment and twin it in order to detect early exploitable risk. And then what is truly in production, including all of the variety of tools that are exponentially growing, and putting together one consistent view of what is being exploited across multiple tiers. So that all has to be fed into an AI that can then creatively learn what is exploitable, what is true risk. And so that to me is the challenge for us, or at least that's the way we're viewing it. We want to focus on the 500 exploitable vulnerabilities that are published every year, as opposed to the growing, year over year linear growth of vulnerabilities that are published in the wild, which is at 45K, I think, at this point. So, for us, focusing on what's real and what's exploitable is the challenge for anyone right now, which is why you're having to shift left and be more proactive, and why the focus is on how do we really define accurately exploitable risk. Obviously, you're leveraging AI.
Okay. Tina, any particular thoughts that you'd add to that about how to gauge the risk and hone in where they need
Yeah,
to?
I think that compliance is the baseline, right? That's kind of the old school thinking that compliance is the most important thing when it comes to cybersecurity. But we've shifted now to risk management as a discipline, right? Compliance tells you that you've met this standard, but risk management tells you whether or not you're actually protected. And I think as we move into, kind of a new world of cybersecurity threats because of AI, because of the flourishing of bad actors out there, particularly since the pandemic. The difference to me is how each plays a part in the security ecosystem and how leadership prioritizes the compliance piece versus risk management. We have to stop asking whether a control exists. We have to think about which part of the compliance lens leads us to that risk management piece. Where is the exposure highest? And what actions can we take to reduce the risk faster? So for me, I think we need to switch just from compliance to a combination of compliance and risk management, where we stop treating the controls as the goal. The goal is moving every day, and the goal is mission resilience. How do we know where our biggest exposures are? And do we accept that we can't fix everything at once? Where are we going to invest? Where in our systems where a failure would hurt our citizens and the services that we give out to them. And trust matters. People are so critical of government now. If you take care of the risk management, the compliance piece, I think, falls into place.
I have an analogy for this. It's like when you go to the doctor for a checkup, he's going to recommend that you work out and lose weight. Eat your vegetables. But if you have a peanut allergy, you get an EpiPen. And this is the difference between compliance and risk. You can't stop working out and eating vegetables, but you really need to worry about what exploitable risk is, existential risk to your company. And that's the challenge for us, is really to identifying your peanut allergy.
Mhm. So, so that's great. Is there anything practical that either one of you would really highlight as steps that, particularly inside a government agency, that can be taken to isolate the allergies, from the, more general advice about eating vegetables and exercising?
I think for me, the advice I give to customers is start with the end in mind. What is most important in the organization to keep running? What's the most important part of cybersecurity that you need to focus on, right? Where are those biggest risks? And then work backwards from there to figure out, how do you get those outcomes to be possibilities, right? That's the most important part of it, because you always have to think about the outcomes, not just from an IT perspective, but from how do we run the business perspective. And I think that's the most important piece of it.
That's interesting, Tina, and that really tracks for me too. It's that holistic view, being able to look at all of the aspects of your business and what is exploitable versus what's being exploited, and have that holistic view on a security program at a strategic level. As I assume that's where you've lived.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, at the local level. So, it's critical.
Yeah, especially when we get into what AI is really all about. And again, we've all been talking about incessantly about how it is a threat, it is a tool. We know it's both. Tina, I want to start with you here. AI is automating fraud at scale. That we're talking benefits claims, Medicaid abuse, pension fraud. How much has that really, up to this point, would you say, changed the threat that the SLED organizations are facing?
Yeah, it's since the pandemic, it's changed so significantly. And AI allows a fraudster to move from program to program and then state to state. So the same bad actors that are working in SNAP benefits are the same bad actors that are working in Medicaid or unemployment or pension fraud. So we used to look at fraud as kind of opportunistic, and it was labor intensive. If I had to sit and file 500 claims for unemployment, I probably couldn't get it done in a day, if that was my full-time job. AI allows bad actors to do that in minutes and seconds. And so I do a lot of work with our customers in the Medicaid space. And the Centers for Medicaid Services said that AI and enhanced analytics on the positive side actually helps them move from pay and chase, right? I give you money and then I have to take it back because I realized that you didn't, earn that money, you weren't entitled to it, towards real-time prevention, right? So we want to get away from that pay and chase. I want to stop the fraud before those payments go out. CMS, the Centers for Medicaid Services, has said that their savings have been well above the $2 billion mark, just because they're using AI to combat the bad actors. And I think, when you look at how AI impacts fraud, it's really in speed and volume. AI can help them generate better schemes. It can help them look more normal across data sets. And fraud teams are seeing a lot more cases than they can manually inspect. So I'm encouraged, because as bad actors get better with AI, we get better with AI. And the more we can detect their patterns and trends, the more we can combat that through the use of data analytics to find the things that they're doing that we wouldn't necessarily be able to see as humans.
That fraud use case is an interesting one for me, just because of what we're building here at TekStream. Um, the way in which you respond to AI generically as a threat differentiates itself much like the way a fraud detection environment would be. Meaning there are fraud detection eligibility. There is fraud detection in the context of a transaction in real time, right? To detect fraud, you're in the wrong country, you're using, the wrong device, whatever. You're detecting fraud in real time in the context of the transaction, but then you also have longer running trend analysis to see if there's abuse.
Right.
The same differentiation is true in AI driven threat response. So there is real time, massive, high velocity, very sophisticated threats that come from AI that need to be remediated in real time. That is a platform that we're building on top of, layering on top of what, the capability of long running detection, behavior analytics, all of those risk-based analysis, all of the types of capabilities, the underlying capabilities for 20 billion row problems, right? And so that's really, really, I think, an interesting analog.
It definitely is. And it's actually, Tina, I really appreciate you surfacing, a quantifiable benefit from AI deployment on the defender side. That's you don't hear those every day. So thank you for sharing that with us. Of course, we all know that there's still a lot of other work to be done. And Bruce, I want to pivot over to you. You're seeing AI-driven attacks across 100% of the deployments that you help your customers oversee. And yet, many CISOs are still saying that they're not seeing them. Why do you think that disconnect is there?
And they're not able to identify it. So part of the interesting part of the way we're using AI and for instance, in deception engineering or attack mathematics, it is interesting that you can use multiple dimensions to be able to come up with a high level of confidence for an AI attack. Is it calling out to the LLM? Does it use this type of attack pattern? The velocity, the sophistication of the attack, the way it morphs, all of those go really into a field of almost AI behavior analytics. But what is equally interesting is classifying those threats and classifying those threats to be able to accurately identify whether it's an human with AI or an AI driven type of threat. Uses those multiple dimensions to be able to come up with a confidence score. I don't think anybody is, quite frankly, able to discern it. So the point being, yes, every company that we've dealt with has AI driven or AI augmented attacks. I mean, if you're a hacker right now, why wouldn't you be using AI? It's ubiquitous. And so you can be guaranteed that it's hitting your threat surface. You're just not able to look for it with an adequate tool. That's what I'd say.
Okay. And Tina, your thoughts on this, and feel free to like press on the premise here. I mean, maybe you're not seeing the disconnect quite so much.
Well, I think the disconnect is real, but I think the reason for the disconnect is that sometimes we don't look in the right place, right? I spend a lot of focus on behavioral signals, right? Not just looking at AI labels. Things like identity abuse, suspicious automation, looking at abnormal API and workflow activity. And then you have all these rapid chains of low signal events that together show an attack at machine speed. The problem is that we look at individual characteristics. We look at some identity anomalies. We look for one of my favorites is the impossible travel, right? You're coming in from an IP address that's outside of the country, but maybe in the next 10 minutes you realize, oh, I didn't turn on my VPN. And so you turn on that VPN, it looks like you're sitting in the state of New Jersey. Those types of things are so critical in the detection of anomalies that will close the gap on that disconnect. I think when we look at, in the benefits space in particular, and cybersecurity is no different. There's so much overlap. When you look at things like there were 500 claims filed from the same IP address on Tuesday at 7 a.m. well, that's odd. We should have a look at that, right? So you see a burst of login attempts or things like that. Those are the types of things that, from a reconnaissance perspective, we should be looking at, and also from a cybersecurity perspective, because cybersecurity is the exploitation of a system, but fraud is the exploitation of a process, right? So we want to look at both of those things and kind of overlay what we see from a cybersecurity perspective. Sometimes that's the most useful data in finding fraud. And so I think when you're using data analytics, you can look at these things more holistically. We as humans don't necessarily have the ability to look at all of that and make sense of it.
Mhm.
It's almost
So
like
it's not,
machine learning used to be really fundamentally dependent upon coming up with the right data set. Now with AI, really it's a matter of feeding it good context, feeding it good signal. So it's absolutely important. I love the way you frame that. That's good. Sorry.
yeah, and what I like about it too, I mean, like, you gave us some great examples of different signals that security teams and fraud teams should be looking at to detect and classify AI-driven threats. But I mean, if I understand you right, Tina, I mean, really kind of what it sounds like, we hear a lot about how AI is helping attackers chain exploits, or maybe the AI is actually chaining the exploits itself. It sounds like there's a chaining process that is still going to be required of security and fraud teams, kind of put these data pieces together, even if they have more robust analytics. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's true because I think when you can look at the patterns that exist, fraudsters and cybersecurity bad actors are really good at covering their tracks. There's always a pattern, right? And so if you look at a cybersecurity breach and you look backwards at the things that that person or that AI agent did to get into your system, there's a pattern there. We just have to uncover it. And I think that's where the data analytics piece comes in. And going back to closing that disconnect, I think it's looking at those behavioral traits and those signals that do exist. We just have to learn how to make sense of them.
Mm. Bruce, anything else you'd add to that?
No, I think that
Okay,
covers it.
great. Good. Okay, I want to, go touch back on the reality of the fact that, again, SLED organizations, we're talking lean teams, we're talking flat budgets, oftentimes, even in, better economic cycles. Bruce, I want to start with you. Most programs are still responding after the fact. So what I'm wondering is what does shifting left look like uh, if you've got a lean team and you've got a flat budget or both?
You put it in the context of SLED, so I'll answer it kind of two ways. Certainly, I think I talked before about getting more proactive, being
Mhm.
able to anticipate exploitable risk. That is certainly where we are focused right now, is getting earlier in the life cycle in both preparation and detection of AI driven threat. So I think shifting left means shifting your focus. That's why we've kind of developed a platform that allows you to do this kind of proactive preparation and proactive detection that applies to your environment holistically, that is somewhat technology agnostic. But in terms of the ability to prepare for it, particularly in the SLED space, one thing that we're seeing is leveraging students has paid off in terms of cost savings. And it's also paid off in terms of raising the level of abstraction for those students. It's also paid off in terms of how state agencies can start to leverage their relationship with some of these schools to be able to provide better security outcomes.
Interesting. So, yeah, and I don't mean to put you exclusively in the SLED, context. I mean, do you feel like that sort of thinking applies outside of SLED as well?
Yeah, no, that was kind of the first part of my comment, which is the
Right.
whole shift left argument. That is to
Got
say
it.
that the ability to get ahead of these threats before they
Mhm.
really start to affect production, in some
Mhm.
ways, wall them off before they're a real problem. So when we do like our deception engineering, anytime we see an actionable threat, we're searching across the entire Splunk ecosystem, in real time to be able to say, where does this threat exist in production? At the same time, if we have IOCs, we're throwing it to a stick stack server, which Splunk has their threat intelligence management platform, can pull those in and automatically start blocking those types of threats or detecting those types of threats. At the same time, we're able to interact with the infrastructure to start building rules to remediate those threats before they're a problem.
Okay. I appreciate that. So that sounds like a pretty proactive defensive framework in a lot of ways. But Tina, I want to have if you could add in on that, like if you could walk us through a little bit about what you feel like a proactive defense framework looks like and how SLED needs would be met within that frame, by deploying that framework.
Yeah, so I think, if you look at hospital systems, healthcare systems, they traditionally have had a lot of slip and fall accidents where somebody slips and falls, there's no camera, and they sue the hospital, they get $20,000 and problem solved, right? Hospitals have had to come up with a risk management procedure for how to deal with these types of things. And I bring that up because I kind of liken it to the way that hospitals and state agencies together have looked at their overall defensive framework, and it's significantly improved, right? Adding cameras in hallways where most of the slip and falls happen eliminates the need to have extensive security walking through the facility to make sure that people are safe. Having video certainly gives you a proactive defense when you have to go to court and defend the actions of the hospital. Cybersecurity does exactly the same thing. We don't have video cameras on all of our systems, but we have technical capabilities to look at the things that are happening, that are low level, but that cause big problems for the organizations. And I think that one of the things that I see in our customers and state agencies have done really, really well is bringing together platform solutions over point solutions. So if you have one solution that can address many problems, that's better than having 5 or 6 separate security products, because at the end of the day, you have to have staff that's trained to use those 5 or 6 systems. And I think a good proactive defensive network or framework involves having something that does multiple things and addresses multiple problems that go towards your mission criticality and resilience.
And I'll add to that, Tina, a plug kind of for this Splunk approach too. I feel that it's really important as we talk to various platform vendors that the response isn't proprietary. That is to say, you can't just look at everything as a network problem and say, well, I'm solving the resiliency problem because I'm patching faster and I'm dynamically responding to shore up my own infrastructure. And that's where I worry about detections. That's where I worry about threats. And that's how I remediate threats. Because the problem is what happens in between vulnerabilities and what happens, from everybody seems to be having a SIM now. What happens when all of these threats need to be remediated and orchestrated? So one thing that Splunk has been good at is being somewhat agnostic in terms of the types of data sources that you pull in and monitor. So hopefully that continues.
So we hope, yes. But that's a great comparison with the hospitals, Tina. I really appreciate that. So, and Tina, I want to just follow through with you because again, given your background and given the number of different type of stakeholders that you've either engaged with or been that stakeholder in some cases, what advice do you have about translating technical risk in a way that is actually going to resonate with an elected official, a university president, somebody who's outside of the technical details and needs to understand it? What's your advice?
It's a good question. I think you translate it to mission, money, and trust. Elected officials, university presidents, agency heads, they really don't care about the technical root cause other than how that root cause impacts services. So, are we exposing sensitive data? Are we triggering some sort of regulatory or legal fallout? Are we damaging public confidence? Do we have to maybe start a World Cup game late because something failed in our cybersecurity fabric, right? The best approach is to describe risk in terms of the impact that it has on the constituents, students, patients, staff, taxpayers, et cetera, because when you can connect it to the impact to the public, that has more meaning at an executive level, an elected official level, because those are the things that matter most. No elected official wants to be caught saying, yep, we failed and we didn't have the right services in place. And as a result, these bad things happen to our residents. That's just completely unacceptable. And so when you talk about technical risk, you have to talk about it from how it impacts the organization. And I think you do it in plain language, right? You don't have to talk about what happened on the 6509 in the data center. You just say if systems go down, students can't register, patients can't be served, or residents can't access benefits, right? You put it in language where it's easy to understand. It doesn't sound like you're trying to hide something behind an IT veil. And I think it becomes more actionable when I can explain to someone, hey, here's the level of disruption that we're going to have because our systems failed.
Business risk terms. I love that, Tina. That's absolutely right. I mean, the first step is to identify the business processes that are critical, the assets that are critical, the identities that are critical. Being able to apply those risk metrics is part of the earliest part of the shift left life cycle. And then you go into what can I detect? What can I close the loop to refine those risk metrics in terms of vulnerability? I love that. That's absolutely
And
true.
and I think those are the types of conversations that Bruce and I are having with our customers every day, right? The technical risk doesn't it doesn't ever get negated because it's always part of the conversation, right? We always have to be looking at what's around the next corner. And I think that's where um, partnering with your vendors, partnering with your technical companies, have that conversation because it's important to
Right.
understand how does TekStream address that kind of risk for me?
That's right.
That's a really important question.
Risk is the language that bridges the SOC to the business.
That's
Risk
right.
is the language that everyone has to speak.
That's well put. And you've kind of teed it up. I mean, that's a good, summarizing a lot of what we've talked about already, but it also tees up for a question I have about how TekStream and Splunk together are helping their customers get more value from their security investments with a lower total cost of ownership and reduced complexity. Bruce, maybe you want to start with that.
I mean, TekStream, part of our pedigree is when we adopt a partner, we get really, really deep. And we've been doing that with Splunk for well over 10 years, I guess now. Um, our fundamental capability comes down to leverage. And so we have developed a lot of um, technology or intellectual property, specifically on a Splunk platform, that enables lower TCO, that enables less complexity, that enables us to search across the entire ecosystem or do multi-tenancy, or our project managers now do onboarding for Splunk, right? Which was a very difficult thing to do historically. It required several weeks and a lot of effort, and we've automated that. So there's a lot of investment that we make in the platforms that we support in order to gain greater leverage for our security platforms. And that certainly has paid off for us with Splunk.
Excellent. Tina, what would you add?
I think that we give customers the security intelligence platform, but TekStream turns that into something that, Bruce mentioned, lower TCO. It comes from knowing how to use the product, right? Most of our customers, new customers, don't know how to use Splunk out of the box. And so that's where TekStream helps to bring it to life. Looking at how you're ingesting data and are we maybe ingesting a little bit more than we need? How do we lower false positives, right? How do we need to bolt on separate point tools for monitoring and response? And I think when you look at TekStream's managed services offerings, these are offerings that really help customers shift some of the security burden, right? Some of that resource burden that we talked about to a managed model instead of bringing on multiple people to support the product. Because a lot of times in government, it's a little different than private industry. Government will buy a technical solution and then they'll say, we don't have enough money to give you the resources to be able to use it. Good luck. And that's where the challenge is. And so I think for public sector and higher education customers, having a partner like TekStream to help with the implementation and the management of those services going forward is really valuable, especially when your budgets are tight.
in a way that fully leverages the investment they made in the technology as opposed to, some bolt on or some other external. Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Great. And last question I have is for our viewers, and whether they're in SLED organizations or whether they're not, where would you recommend that they go beyond Splunk.com or TekStream.com?
I think it's important that our viewers stay curious about what those trends are that are out there. I think one of the most important things that I learned from working in government was, what are our peers doing? Find out not only what your peers in the government space are doing, but look at what private sector is doing as well, because they deal with a lot of the same challenges. They deal with it a little bit differently. And I think there's good lessons to be learned, from looking at how the private sector deals with challenges. And, probably over the last 15 years, we've seen kind of a shift in where CIOs and CISOs come from in the government space. A lot of them are coming out of the private sector. So I think, if you're looking to learn more, stay curious and look around and see what everybody else is doing, because that's the best way to have clarity and vision about where you want to go next.
That's great advice. Bruce, anything you'd add?
I mean, we publish so much to LinkedIn. I say, honestly, I hate to say it, but some of the social media platforms, even YouTube, is a really invaluable source to just get context for some of these innovations. It's all moving so fast that it's really hard to pinpoint one source for your learning at this point. So I would say a lot of the use cases, particularly around public-private partnerships that we're engendering, that are kind of changing the whole face of higher ed, if you will, in response to AI. A lot of those use cases get published on LinkedIn, not just from us, but from
Mhm.
authorities in the space, specialized kind of higher education or specialized whole estate types of resources. That's, I think, where I would go.
That's great advice. As you say, I mean, as we've talked about today, there are so many signals out there, whether or not you're talking in the security context or just the greater context. But I feel that like today's conversation has been one of those signals that I think is really going to be beneficial to people. So, Tina, Bruce, I really want to thank you for your time and your input on this and your thoughts. It's really appreciated.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks, Matt.
Sure thing. And I also want to thank all of our attendees for taking some time out of their day to attend this session. For all of you, I hope you've gained some information. I certainly think you would have, that's going to enable your institution to be better prepared to mount a coordinated defense. And I really hope that we're going to see you again soon at one of our upcoming events. For ISMG, I'm Matthew Perry. Thanks for tuning in.